Hare Krishna. Hello and welcome to everybody to this web-based discussion forum, which we have titled India is Still India. And today again, we are joined by Mr. Bharat Trivedi. Welcome, sir. And happy to see you again for another session with us. There are a few points which actually we could not cover due to want of time. We discussed things about how this migration setup or the mindset of how this migration happens. People want to migrate to Western world, how it happens, and how we have been made to look inferior, much more inferior as a culture, as a set of people we are, so that this migration becomes much more lucrative or looks much greener that side. That we discussed, and also we discussed about how the same set of problems or rules and regulations, how they are handled in the West and how visa is handled back home in India due to some stringent punishments, implementation of law, all those things we discussed. And last week you touched a little bit on this Swarajya concept, which is that village level economy or local economy development. Before we start, I want to put this question up because a little bit of societal issues which we have not finished from the last session. Today, if you actually look at the societal problems, revolve around so-called the women's safety. The women are not having a safe lifestyle, or they are being exploited, or something like that. Traditional culture of us, women were well protected. There was no way that in our traditional times, when we see our old scriptures or even old manuscripts, we don't find anywhere that the women were having this kind of insecurity, I should say. So I would want you to a little bit give a perspective. How this is this same in the Western world? I mean, whether they have the same kind of insecurity there, where the societal issues are mostly based on revolving around them, or it is something that because we have imported what I call a Western idea, we are facing some complications.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. It's nice to speak to you again. Let's start with, well, there are different sets of problems which are prevalent in India. Some of the problems we have in India are similar to what are in the West, because the society is being structured in a certain way and it's going in a certain way. So while India is, or the older India, or people who hold traditionalist views, they are considered as backward and they are considered illiberal in terms of the freedoms which are accorded to women according to, I guess, if you use the term modern standards.
Yes.
So in the West, there is a lot of freedom for women. They are free to choose a lot of things, how they live, if they should get married or not get married, or which age they should get married, and how to live a life. So what the Western world has done is it has essentially taken away, and again, if you'll pardon me, they have taken, I'm repeating myself, they have taken away the family unit, which when we think about family in the traditional, even in the traditional Western sense, it is not a small family. It is always, a couple of generations living together.
Even in the West, you're saying?
Even in the West. Even in the West, if you look at, people, those people who watch movies, especially if they look at the Italian movies, because of Roman Catholicism, Italy still had, even the Russians,
yes,
they still have this strong familial bonding culture, and that is partly based on what their culture is, but it is also part of the religiosity or the religious views they held up until very recently. Or most people in Italy, I think, are still Roman Catholic.
Yes.
So you could see that there is an influence of, if you call it dharma, it is their dharma, or the religion they follow. Obviously, religion is not dharma, but for the purpose of this conversation, we'll just use that term for now. So we can see that I was reading today in the newspaper, there is a startup, because I work in startups. So there is a startup which is actually putting younger people in old age homes. And they
You
are
take care
actually,
of them?
well, yeah, the younger people, see what has happened in the West is, and that is sort of coming to India, it has come to India in certain areas, is because land has now been commoditized. So where your parents live, and if a son wants to live close to their parents, or if they want to expand their house, there is literally no space. So if you live in a flat, you either have to buy another flat because you cannot build, because there is no land. And even if you want to buy in that certain area, you have to work very, very hard. And for most people, the wages haven't gone up by the, in comparison to the rate of inflation, which has come into these asset prices. And we can touch on that, how your government monetary policies have actually skewed the entire economy towards something where it is just causing more and more burden for younger people. So this startup, I think it is in Netherlands or Denmark, one of these two countries. I was reading about it today. So they are actually charging these younger people to live, but these younger people also assist the elderly people in doing their chores. Now, when I look at this, I immediately remembered my own childhood, where we were actively taking care of our grandparents. I know my grandfather used to give me a little amount of money, and he used to say, okay, go to the shops and bring me this or bring me that. So there was no need for a delivery service. I mean, now it's a big business that there is a delivery service, but previously, your family was big enough that there was always someone there to do these menial things.
Yeah, it was a personalized delivery service. Today it's impersonal delivery service.
Yes, and you don't have to pay for it; it's free. So what has happened is, because of this family structure breaking, the most vulnerable sector, which is our young women.
Correct.
And then secondary, because it's women who are the most affected, then automatically children, the children are most affected.
Yes.
Again, and I don't have any figures for this, but again, if I remember correctly, if my memory serves me correctly, the biggest recipients of government welfare in the US are young single mothers.
That's very true. That's very true.
Now, why are there so many young single mothers? See, we have given them the choice to act freely. Now, what is that freedom doing? I mean, yes, we have given them the freedom, which is a good thing, supposedly a good thing, I suppose. But you should not only look at the first order effects. In risk management, we have something what we call a second order effect. So say if I strike a ball very hard, now that ball will travel very fast, but if that ball goes and hits a glass, the glass shatters. That's a second order effect.
Correct.
So what has happened is, through these freedoms, which we think of as freedoms because we are born and brought up in this, there are second order effects. Correct. Now, for a minute, I am not going to say that certain practices in India or certain practices even in the West are something that can be legitimized, or they can be defended. But the thing is that it comes back to training. So how do you run a good company? Let's just take that for an example, and then we can port that concept into how do you run a society, and then how do you run a family. So the first thing any good manager will tell you is that anytime you bring someone on board, you have to train them in the company's culture. Because they may be technically skilled, they may perhaps be the best people in the world to, perform a certain function. But if they are not a cultural fit for your
way of functioning,
for your company's morals, ethics, and so on and so forth, it's going to end up in a disaster for both parties involved.
That's true.
So what we have done is we have given all these rights to people. yeah, the men are free to act in the way they want to act. Women are free to act in the way they want to act. What is the second order effects? Why are there problems? And I'm not saying that there were no problems in the traditional societies. I mean, in this day and age, problems are everywhere. So what happens is, you can reduce the problem. I mean, if you ask anyone who does anti-corruption, they will, if you go and ask them, can you stop all fraud and all corruption? They will say no, but you can minimize it.
Yes.
So the traditionalist societies, over, I guess through their experience of surviving millions of years, they have come up with certain principles which are time tested and which perhaps do not remove all the ills of the society. And I'm also not saying that the principles introduced by them cannot be misused. But if people are trained properly, if people are taught properly, you can reduce a lot of these social issues. Say, for example, again, we go back to young women with single mothers with children. As I mentioned, I'm working on a project for eradicating homelessness in Australia with a gentleman who himself, through no fault of his own, became homeless for a certain period in his life. So through our research, we found that the biggest recipients or biggest cohort of people who require a home are women above 35.
Oh,
Now, why is that happening?
that's very surprising.
It is happening because these women, they have been exploited. They were allowed to live a certain way of life, but now who has to pick up the tab? It is these women who have been exploited and left alone. And also, now the state has to come in and take care of these women because they are wards of the state, at some point in time.
Yes.
So what we have done is, we have removed the social safety net which the family used to provide, not only in terms of monetary security, but also physical and mental security.
Very true.
Many of these people who have to go through these horrible experiences in their life, they need psychological assistance.
Correct.
There is a joke which goes on, and I'm not sure how true it is, but there must be some truth in it, that half of America is on Xanax. Now, Xanax is a mood control drug.
Oh, yeah.
For those who are uninitiated in this term.
There was one point which I want to, just for comparison purpose, because you brought this point of having a family atmosphere. I have a question later, but I just want to put this point here. I met one senior doctor 3-4 months back. He made a very interesting study, which was presented in the JAMA, which is that Journal of American Medical this thing. So he quoted this study, which was done comparing the US medical field versus the Japanese medical field. Now, what is happening is, in US, most of the patients who come to a hospital, they, over a period of time, after they get, I'm only talking about inpatients who are getting admitted for some complications. Most of them, what they do is, when they get discharged from the hospital, invariably they take this kind of drugs, which is there for some psychological problems. And vis-a-vis the Japanese system, where what he is quoting is that the advancement in the medical field is almost or even better there in US. In the medical equipments, the kind of things are there. But the success rate, or the rate at which the medical things are working in US, is very, very low compared to a Japanese one. Now, what they found out is that the most of the cases, the inpatient ward, or whatever you call, have a facility of facilitating the family to live together and take care of that patient. As a patient, if you go and get admitted, you need some psychological moral support, I would say. That is being provided in a culture which is our Oriental culture, you can call. And this Western culture, on the other hand, is actually providing them an what I call as a solitary confinement type of an thing, so which is actually aggravating the problem. Why did, as an Indian culture, which we already had this kind of family bonding or family way of living, instead of choosing, because the industrialization is the way to go, or jobs have to be created, people came to cities or whatever we can accept as the time for time being. Why did we choose the Eastern concept of how they are doing? Rather, we went to the Western world, where the social fabric has been broken. Today, we see the same thing in our cities.
Yeah, I think India already had a culture, or India has still, some vestiges of that culture.
Yeah.
India does not need to look outward to find anything, because India is the land where people from all over the world used to come and still come in search of spirituality.
Very true.
So India is the land of knowledge. India is
still India.
Yeah, India is still India. And I think it goes back to the conversation we had in our first session, whereby it has been systematically removed from the Indian psyche. The Indians have been told over and over again by certain individuals, by the state, by the television, by movies, that their culture is not worth anything. And once you create this, I mean, it's a classical technique which has been used over the years, where if you destroy the ideologues of a culture, if you break their families, then essentially what you get are slaves.
That's very true.
And the Indians have unfortunately fallen prey to this propaganda.
That's very true.
When you don't know that you have gold in your pocket, you throw that away, and then you'll replace it with something else, maybe some stones or something.
Have we gone really too far that it's very difficult to come back? What do you think about this?
Well, partly we cannot go back. I'll tell you one very specific example why we cannot go back in certain areas. Say, for example, India has an existential threat from two of its neighbors. If you do not have defense technology, they'll run you over, tomorrow. So I think we have to keep pace with certain things in the world.
Now, my question is only for the societal thing. I mean, this.
Yeah. I mean, the society actually gets impacted by all of these things. See, for having a defense industry, you need perhaps a coal industry to fuel the steel industry. Then that would, you need weapons, you need vehicles, you need communication equipment. So perhaps it is not 100% possible for everyone to go back to to that old India which we know about, which was structured in a certain way. However, having said that, it is not stopping us from following the culture which our forefathers had, and the knowledge which they have given us. Actually, if we live a lifestyle which was given by them, some certain very, very simple principles which were followed by our ancestors are some. Now, what happens is people eat the whole day, then they have to go to a gym or they go on a morning walk to reduce their weight. Why don't you incorporate that in your lifestyle?
As a way of living, your way of life.
Yeah. So even without thinking, you are doing some exercise.
That's true.
Now, women, we touched on the problems of women. Another problem which women are facing now is that they get, bad knees. A lot of women get bad knees.
Yeah, today, yes.
Why do they get bad knees? Because they're standing and cooking. The traditional system was you sit and cook. When you are standing,
Yes,
your blood pressure is higher. Your heart is pumping faster. You are putting weight on your knees unnecessarily for a couple of hours a day. You're standing still, or you are leaning over, which creates back problems. However, the old traditional system was that women will sit down peacefully and cook.
Yes. It's actually a very valid, nice point you have brought, because there are so many things like this, small nuances, which we have changed in the name of better living, but actually they come back and haunt us in a different way. Actually, that's the point. It's a very nice point you brought in. Before that, I want to ask you this question: that how do you bring back that even familiar bonding? See, today, wherever you live, even you live in a city or live in a village or live in a multi-storied building or whatever you are, wherever you are, how to bring back, see, to some extent, I'd say at least India still has that in their DNA, but still, how to stop that erosion of that cultural impact of family getting, disrupted, or how to bring back that familiar bond?
We have to educate people about these things. There has to be a concentrated effort, not only from people like us, but from the intellectuals of the society, who should understand this and who should take this forward. I mean, there is a growing awareness in a certain set of people. There is a gentleman I know by the name of Mahesh. This gentleman hails from Kerala. He was in Dubai for a certain period of time. Then he came back to India because he was feeling that he's not spending enough time with his family. So what he has done in the last 2 years is that he has built a home by himself. And there are videos of it on YouTube where he actually goes through the whole process and how, he's worth listening to. How his life has changed from his heavy pressure job in Dubai to a simple, life in Kerala.
That's very true.
He figured out for himself that he does not need the latest car to give him the satisfaction. Small pleasures and time spent with his family, he found were more pleasing to him than the pleasure which the latest motor car could give him. Our forefathers also wanted us to be spiritually inclined. So a good family, how do you actually get people to be moral and ethical? I mean, this is the classic dilemma which an atheist has. I mean, the atheist brush it off.
Yes.
But I think the reason why they brush it off is because they don't have a good answer to it.
Sorry to just interrupt you. This point actually we touched upon in one of our programs earlier, where we touched this point, the concept called how this two things which we touched is, one is the contentment in life, another is the aspirational value. So the aspirational value has been kept so high at various levels, even for a pauper on the street to a fellow who is a multi-millionaire. The aspirational value has been kept at a higher pedestal every now and then by various people at the society or whatever. Now, this aspirational value creates that set of a feeling that previously, which the early society used to have, is something that what is common good for our community of people, say in our village or in our town or in our community. What is what is it common good for everybody here? People used to think that, I have to live in a better way. Betterment of my family is also paramount. But on the other hand, if the thing that I am going to live in a better way at the fallout of the community as a whole, people won't do that previously. But today, that community feeling or the feeling of living for a common cause has been lost. From an younger age, this kind of living with the society, living with friends, living with all these things are to some ways eroding actually in our culture.
Yeah. Not only that, I just remembered this point on culture. Remember how we were speaking about, these young women being left alone. A major portion of that is caused not only by husbands deserting the women, but also through divorces. Now, this is my observation, and obviously, and I can be challenged on this. But while I was in Australia, I observed that the Greeks, the Italians, and the Lebanese, they focused a lot on families and family values, and they had, in comparison to the British or the English stock, they had much better family life than the English stock. I don't have any figures to back this up, but this is my observation. And it sort of goes to show that culture, what your parents teach you, it plays a very, very important part in how you perceive the world and how you behave in the world. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule. Some people will be, regardless of, what you do for them, they'll act in a certain way, behave in a certain way. But again, the problems of the society cannot be made zero, but they can be reduced to an extent that it does not cause an issue for a majority of the population. What has happened with the modern lifestyle is that we have tried to optimize everything. We have tried to optimize the family life also. And in our quest to optimize and perfect our life, we have constituted a plethora of or a vast ocean of laws which either are implemented incorrectly, sometimes interpreted incorrectly, and sometimes they are just not implementable. Is drugs. I mean, it's an issue which is causing more family breakups now than it was at any time in the past. People get hooked on substances. Once people get hooked on substances, they not only lose their, their livelihood, their families, but also what happens is they become sometimes menace to the society. And what happens is essentially, because now you have broken the larger family, so now there is no supervision of a child, which means the child is now in the hands of either a teacher or a caretaker or the TV or the internet nowadays for most of his day. So all his training is coming from these mediums which are not closely related to the child, which means the duty of care or the extent of care which they will receive from these external suppliers of care will always fall short in comparison to what a family member, even an extended family member, would provide. Say, for example, my nephew. If anything happens to my nephew, I'll be more concerned for him than I'll be concerned for some kid, on the street, or someone, if I'm teaching in a school or someone else, because that emotional connection is not there. Family gives you that connection. And it sort of forces you to act in a certain way because there is a familial bond. I mean, we can say that the bond is based on the bodily concept of life, but that's fine. But for the functioning of the society, this bond is required. And if this bond is taken away, then your societal problems will just keep increasing, and you will have to devote more and more and more tax dollars and resources to fund this. And then when you do that, you will be then charging the productive section of the society with more and more taxes, which will cause other problems on the other side. Actually, the problem of the modern world is neither the right nor the left has the right idea on how to solve these problems. And you can include the libertarians in here, for good measure. The problem with all these philosophies is that they are inherently atheistic.
It's very true.
The problem is all of them are atheistic, which means that they do not have the right solution.
The dharmic solutions, that's very true.
Yes.
See, this is what I was about to quote, that from the Vedic scriptures we learn, even from a family thing, that man being a social, I can call an animal, that what has happened is that because of that societal bond or a larger family bond, there was actually constant overseeing, constant supervision. So he actually, everybody in the family or the community feels that, see, I'm being watched, I have to behave properly, or I have to be, or I'll become a stigma, or I'll be ostracized, or something like that. Today, because of that individualistic mindset, or mindset that what is it in for me, or what is it in for me for living, I'm least bothered about any of my blood relatives or even my community or whatever. So now what has happened is there is no overseeing. Even the laws are not able to oversee them, or the laws are not able to bring them up to a proper place. So what it has happened is we have lost both the things, whether we have lost the internal, I would call the internal regulation mechanism or the external regulation mechanism. I mean,
no, we have essentially outsourced our duties to the state in many of these matters.
Yes.
I mean, why should a young woman be left alone with a child?
Yes.
Why should the husband or the paramour or the lover not be made accountable?
Yes.
He should be made accountable because he has enjoyed, which means there is a responsibility.
Yeah.
But we have to train women also and tell them that they have to adjust. They have to compromise.
Both men and women. Yes. And see, what happens is, this is another point, is that's where from the younger age you have to bring this up. See, today, what has happened from the younger age, if you don't bring it, you cannot inculcate this feeling at the age of 20 or 18 or 30 or whatever. It has to be brought from the age of 1, 2, 3, 4 or something, where even from the Western medicine perspective, what they have done the research, which is very well aware to most of the people around the world, that the formative years of the kid is actually from the age of 5 to 8 or something, where the brain gets developed. So
5 to 13. 5 to 13 is the formative stage.
Yeah. So till that time, what is being fed in or what is being given in is actually what stays for the entire life. He becomes like a disciplined person. He becomes disciplined. He becomes a social person. He becomes social or whatnot. So that's where I feel many. That's what I want to even touch upon another session, or even I want to call some subject matter expert on this area of this education. That I feel many of our problems, solutions to many of our problems, either economical or societal, might be in the educational sector, is my hunch. Because that is where you can at least transform the future generation or transform the mindset of the future generation.
Yeah. So man is a social animal. So whatever they see around them, say for example, I mean, if you see your parents disrespecting their parents, and and your parents expect you to behave in a way where they have not behaved correctly, they are just fooling themselves.
Yes.
Because when the child sees, and this is where it comes back to the family unit, it comes back to the right training, it comes back to the right mindset, and education is a very big part of it.
Yeah.
And that is why in traditional India, not everyone could become a teacher. Yeah, when education becomes a monetary transaction, then it loses the respect. See, there is another thing which Indians have sort of conflated. Indians think that modern education is Vidya. Now, Vidya is not modern education. Modern education at best is some information.
Yeah.
That's all. It's neither a skill nor anything else like that. The education has become so commoditized.
Yes. One point which I want to bring in, we have instituted, or we are trying here in our community here in Salem, to have this kind of a traditional educational model. which we are trying it out. It's actually because that we are just replicating the traditional system. And to some extent, we have got some 1 or 2 batches coming out of that thing. And clearly, it's very visible that for the first few years, we don't teach them any of this, what we call so-called knowledge or so-called information, like what you put. They are only taught on discipline. They are only taught on how to behave as a human being, how to take care of themselves, take care of others, socially acceptable person for a very even from the age of 5, 6, or 7. We teach that only to them. Even after the age of 8 or 9, they are not even taught anything else except this: how to get up early, how to be disciplined, how to be much more, polite, humble, sober, how to accept some difficulties. See, today, many of the youngsters don't even cannot understand how difficulties come, like what you said. So this inculcation of training, which we are doing in our setup, we are actually finding them when they, the first batch, which we actually now today, they are all 22, 23 years old. They are much more sober. They are much more, able to understand. I mean, they have not become the what I call as the biggest entrepreneurs or biggest academicians or whatever in the common modern parlance. But definitely, I would say they have become a better human being. They are actually doing one of the fellow, I still remember, is doing wonderfully well, both as a material thing and both as a also for a societal thing. So this may be an example which maybe our educationalists or academicians can look into, that how to, rather than going and employing from a third age or 4 years of age, cramming them with so many details, it's not giving out any result. I still remember, he might also vouch for it. What I see, I work in a bank, and today I'm doing some farming and I'm preaching something. I have never, I don't know for what all those years and years of information which I got, where I used it.
Yeah, you can't.
Yes.
And it's useless.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've spent a good part of my life in schools and colleges. I have done a CA. I'll tell you, if you put all that, maybe there were 2 courses which actually helped me in my job in accounting. And when I was actually studying an accounting course, maybe there were 2 sessions or two courses which actually gave me some practical knowledge or meaningful knowledge of what to do. The rest is just noise.
Yes, that's very
It's
true.
useless information. It clogs your brain. It stops you from thinking.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. We have to make it much more dynamic. Today, it's much more static. See, I've seen some students, because we used to go to some colleges for some lecturing. We find the students have completely become unilateral. They have been made to just hear. They are not being made to think. So the system has made them just as hearing machines. I mean, whatever has been told, it's just taken in. And during the quarterly, half-yearly, or semester, or whatever exams, whatever is gone in has to come out in some form, and they are being graded for that. Now,
no, see, the modern education system is actually creating slaves, because they are preparing these children for the drudgery, which is called a good job. So I'll tell you one, very funny comparison of, how people lead their lives nowadays. So you essentially wake up your child, you feed them something, then you put on a dress, which is, I call, which is a uniform. Yeah, see, and then you ship them off to, someone else.
Yes.
A school or a child care or wherever.
Whatever.
Then they have to deal with these outsiders their whole day, and they get, they keep getting tense the whole day, because these are people who they can't correlate with, because they keep changing most of the times. These teachers come and go, and it's a very transaction-like environment.
Yes, money based.
And then you do it for, I guess, a good 16 to 17 years of their life in school, and then you put them into further education, which is the same drudgery. And then what happens is, once you are educated, what are you expected to do? You're expected to find a job. What do you do in a job? You wake up in the morning, you eat something, you put on some clothes. Sometimes, if you're a factory worker, you put on a uniform, or if you are, perhaps working in an office, you cannot go into the office wearing, a short and a t-shirt. You have to put on the proper attire, which essentially means what you have been trained for the last 20, 23 years, 24 years in school is actually you being prepared to work in this hostile environment, which we call a job. Because in the job, you don't know anyone, you have no loyalty to anyone. These people have no loyalty to you.
Yeah.
You are a number in a large company where just by someone's whim, you can be, your entire department can be removed by the stroke of a pen. You can be made redundant. And then a job is like a drug, because you are given just enough amount of a honey drop or a money, a reward to keep you performing this drudgery all your life. And then what happens? You work 30, 40 years, then you retire. What happens to most people who retire? They don't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah.
So they go on these cruises, they go on these world tours in in the West. India, they just sit at home, watch TV, and die. What is the purpose of their life?
They have lost it. They have lost it. See, this is the point which I want to bring back as a concluding remark for our session. That this so-called job, I won't say job satisfaction, but some what I call as surety of making a very standard way of living, which this modern jobs provide, or the modern city life provides. You were touching this point in the last session that the only way by which the wholesome 360-degree well-being of an individual can be brought out in a much more serene place, or much more like what I call as a village kind of a setup. I won't call village. I can call something like a localized setup where it can be made much better. But my last question to you is, how do you think it can be brought out now? But how do you make them understand that the other side also is not that bad?
Well, see, there will be proponents of both systems. Like we are leaning a certain way. So other people will be convinced that their way is the right way, or the modern way is the right way. And
its advantages, definitely.
And that is, I guess, those liberties should not be taken away at any, in any system.
Yeah.
Because everyone has to fly their own aeroplane. They have to figure out on their own what works for them and what doesn't work for them. What we are saying is that here is a system which has worked for millions and millions of years. We used to have this system in its modern, or in its latest form when it was rejected outrightly. It had some issues. Obviously, we need to work on those issues and fix those issues. But the way to fix that is not to throw the whole system out. It is actually to fix the parts which are wrong. Say, for example, you get a boil on your hand. You don't cut off your hand to fix, to get rid of the boil. You actually puncture the boil and, put some medicine on it, and then you tape it up, and, off you go. You ensure that, you don't put water on it for the next couple of days, and you'll be okay. The problem now is that, if there is even a slightest problem in the old system, they just want to throw everything away, and they want to bring something new, which has, again, a lot of second order disastrous effects. So how can this be brought back? There are a lot of people in India, and that's why India is still India. There is great potential in India where there is still some semblance, or some, I guess, some faith in people to follow the traditional system. And we can see that. Which other country do you see millions of people going to something like a Kumbh Mela, which, it's the biggest event in the world by any means, but it is entirely non-eventful most of the times. And people go there, do their religious duties and come back. You cannot see that anywhere else in the world. This is very, very, very unique to India. What we have to do is we have to take shelter of these people who are religious, not say educate them, but I should, perhaps, we need to reintroduce these concepts. We should make them aware of these things. We should bring these to them. And then we hope that, we would find through our small efforts a certain group of individuals, and that we have to create certain individuals who understand this and who are willing and active to go and propagate this idea to other people, to other like-minded people. And hopefully at some point in time, by God's grace, we should have enough people who will be able to see that this lifestyle is something that is beneficial not only for themselves, but for the society in general. And once that happens, then we can go back to following certain aspects of our traditional life. I still am of the opinion that it is not possible to wind back the clock entirely. Yes. But having said that, at the same time, it is not difficult for many people to actually live in a way that is conducive for themselves and for their families. There will be certain individuals who will either not agree with this, or their services are required in such a way that they may not be able to live and and in such an environment.
Yeah.
The following our tradition and dharma, that can be done anywhere.
The villages today, what they have got is because of the media, TV, and other things. They have got that cultural degradation. But the starting of that, which I would presume, started because these people looked towards the lucrativeness of the urbanized setup. Now, why I brought this point is, if we, by any means, if we make this countryside economy or local economy much more lucrative for these people, then there might be a possibility that they will stop going back to cities, or some of them will come back to there. Once they come to their original places, then it's much more easier to live in a family bond, have the culture slowly revive because of the society as a whole living together or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are seeing some trend towards that. This COVID experience for many people has not been very pleasant.
Very true.
And we are seeing that a lot of people who were previously working in the cities are now returning to their native, either smaller towns or their villages, because they have seen the risk which comes with living in a large city where you do not have family. This COVID has exposed a lot of the problems which we have been highlighting over the years with city life. And it's going to get worse as time progresses. The cities are going to become more and more unlivable because of how the government is acting, the economic policies of both left-wing and right-wing governments. It really doesn't matter. Because the idea is economic progress at the cost of everything else. Regardless of how you think about it, the whole modern credit-based economy is going to cause these issues on an ongoing basis. The traditional Indian economy was a much more stable economy because it grew at a very, very slow rate, which was manageable.
Yeah, I thought this term, when you said credit-based economy, previously it was trust-based economy.
Yes.
It was trust-based, and that was much more conducive for the well-being of the society as a whole. Today, the credit-based system is not helping anybody. Even the credit companies themselves are not to the people also, common man also. That's a nice point. Yes.
I mean, we can do multiple sessions on the fallacies of the modern monetary system.
That I want to touch actually.
Regardless of which philosophy you follow, all of them are credit-based, and which essentially means that you need an ever-expanding supply of labor or productivity or something else to keep the system going. And that is an impossible thing. Actually, I remember that the Pakistanis used to joke about India,
Mm-hmm.
that India has the Hindu growth rate, which is around 2.5%, and they have the better growth rate because it was around 5% or 6% or whatever it was.
Yeah.
The Hindu growth rate was essentially a much more stable system of growth because it's manageable, it's controllable, and it does not cause hyper bubbles in specific asset classes.
Yes, that's
But then
very
that's a conversation we can have another
true. No,
time.
that's very true. I want to have, because that's your core competence or subject matter expertise, which I would take it, because you are a finance person per se. So I would like to have another session sometime later on this credit-based system or the currency economy or monetary policies and other things, which would at least give a perspective of how this is all built up as a phantasmagoria or something where people don't even understand. It's become much more complex. So we will try to catch you up sometime later on that specific topic, sometime later.
All good, sir.
Thank you so much for finding us some time continuously for many days at a specific time. It has been wonderful talking to you to get a perspective of how the Western world is functioning, what is the Western mindset is, and how slowly we can at least stop the erosion. I would say, I would not say that bring back. I would say stop the erosion, because it's already there in us. The culture is already there, fortunately. So at least we should try to bring out some solutions how it can be stopped. So that's what our humble attempt is in this regard. So let us see how it goes. So thank you once again for joining, and hope to catch you again sometime later.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Hare Krishna.
Okay. Hare Krishna.